And I thought of a favorite old Jim Henson Muppet-style show that I watched called Fraggle Rock. I don't know if anybody remembers Fraggle Rock. All right, so I didn't know until I started reading about Fraggle Rock that it actually debuted the year I was born, 1983. So depending on where you are, some people think that probably was a long. Fraggle Rock was a Jim Henson Muppets type show that came out with puppets. It was this huge cavern full of these creatures, the Fraggles. And so I was introducing this to my girls. And it was interesting as I watch it now, so many years later, that I'm viewing this with, and I think, there's a lot more going on in this show than I realized back then. And so I started reading. While they're watching, I'm on my computer reading about Fraggle Rock. Because it has these Muppet characters who are, the Fraggles that they call the Doozer, these sort of scaffolding towers. And the Fraggles walk around and they break off chunks of those towers and they eat them. That's what the Fraggles eat, is what the Doozers build. And in episode 1 of the show, the Fraggles are definitely oblivious to this. They're just snapping off things from the other creatures and eating it. But over the arc of the show, they come more to recognize episodes that very directly and religion. With my girls from school that day, and I was thinking about the other ways in their life that they learn, that they are part of a culture or a society that is interdependent. At their school, just this week, these past couple days, there were a couple cool examples of that. Got to dress up in little elementary school, parading up and down the halls. And Aubrey, in her classroom, her first grade class, she had children from Ecuador and Mexico and Pakistan and Vietnam. So they're in their school and their eyes are being opened to realizing that it's more than just what's happening in those classrooms, that they're connected to the wider world in a different way. And then the very next day, on Saturday, yesterday, there was a fundraiser at the school that Aubrey helped work on for the PTA. It was a fun run at the school that raised money. They called it the Tiger Trot, the Jamestown Tigers. And it started with a 5K race that went through the school neighborhood, where people signed up to run all through the neighborhood streets. Our girls were out in front of our house with a water station. And then it ended at the school, and there was this celebration. And so I thought those two things were a really cool sort of global and local parallel, that they're learning that their school is part of a whole world, that there's so much happening and a connectedness to beyond, and yet it's also rooted in a place. It's connected to this neighborhood and the people who live around, and the people who live around the school were invited to be part of this celebration, even if they don't have children at that school, because it emphasized they're part of the same neighborhood. There is an interconnectedness. There is an interdependence. Something similar is happening here in our church neighborhood this week. Wednesday, May 1st time, we were asked, can parents come here in our church parking lot and then walking from here to Jones Elementary School? Because, Jones, in addition to having kids from this neighborhood, it has the Spanish immersion program. So there's a lot of students and they're going to walk the few blocks to the elementary school to remind families the school is part of the neighborhood. Even if they don't live in this neighborhood, they don't just parachute in and be part of the school and then leave. All this drives at, I think, what Dr. King talked about in a number of his speeches, and that's a truth, isn't it? That we are, it is, but it's a beautiful way of saying we're dependent on each other, and we are inescapably intertwined in one another, for better and often for worse. At the same time, I was thinking about all this interdependence. I mean, my girls were home sick from school, and of course I was thinking, I know how they got sick. They got sick from germs at that school, That's another way that they're bound together. They've been sick so much this year because they share life in that little space. And that's the truth as well. And in terms of actual sickness, actual germs and virus, that's a lesson we were all reminded. So and that viruses that begin in one side of the world, and we know that that's true for other ills of the world. The way we treat our earth is the same earth that people are on the other side. That what happens to one neighborhood in the city affects the other. That when we see not letting us hide from the violence and the atrocity that's happening in Gaza, they're reminding us that what happens there affects us here. Hear Jesus speaking to in the gospel today when he says, I am the you are branches. Apart from me, there is nothing. There's no life. A branch that's not connected to me may as well be cut off from God. And we are the branches that show the fruits of that life. Yes. All throughout, so that gospel comes from John's gospel. And John is the one who uses these statements where Jesus says, I am. You are connected. Just as I am part of God, the vine grower, so you are part of that same, and you can't be cut off. So if I am the vine, then you are my branches. It's a word of comfort for them, and it's also a mission. You are the branches. So go be the branches. I got this book on my shelf that I read in seminary by this theologian, Gerhard Lofink, good theologian name, and it's called Does God Need the Church? That title has stuck with me since I read it because basically over the course of that book, he answers the question, does God need the church? And the answer he comes up with is that God doesn't really need anything. But what God desires is for the flourishing of all people, abundant life for all people to be connected to the life of God and know their best life, and that the way God has chosen to work in the world is through when he chose two faithful people. And he said, God said, this is going to take a while, but I'm choosing you to begin this family. And starting with you, the circle is going to grow and grow wider and wider and wider until through you, the entire world will be blessed. Through that line of Abraham and Sarah, we get King David. And from King David's line, we get Jesus. And Jesus comes with the same message. Jesus says, what God desires is for all people to be part of this kingdom of God. Out the branches off the vine through you. So in this moment, in the last night that he's with his disciples, he says, carry the mission forward. Make this a reality. And so all through Acts, the book of Acts that we've been reading in the Easter season, that's what we see the disciples do. We see the disciples carry the message to a wider and wider circle of people. And today we get this awesome story of the disciple Philip and the Ethiopian official. So the circle is getting wider than they could imagine.